Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menasce. Today's another AMA episode, that is Ask Me Anything. I love to answer your questions, and if you have a question you think is going to be of broad interest, send it in. I'll answer it live on the air. Send your questions to victor@victorjm.com. That's victor@victorjm.com. This question comes from Ms. Cortez in Atlanta, and she writes, I've been offered the opportunity to invest in a ground-up construction of a new warehouse located on the Interstate 10 corridor. I've sent you the entire package of information from the deal sponsor, including the webinar and the investor package. Love to get your perspective on the offering and whether this is something you would consider investing in. Well, Ms. Cortez, this is a great question. You did provide a pretty complete package. Now, I have not taken this through a full underwriting, but I'm giving you my answer simply based on the information you provided. This offering memorandum is designed to comply with the exemption from registration under SEC rules under Regulation D, Subpart 506B, which is limited to 35 non-accredited investors and an unlimited number of accredited investors. The 506B exemption requires a substantive pre-existing relationship between the sponsor and the investors. And if that relationship doesn't exist, then the investor is not a candidate to invest. It's one of the non-solicitation requirements of that exemption. So I don't know whether you would be considered a candidate to invest in this offering based on the depth of your relationship with them. Now, I'll put that aside. When we perform due diligence, we look at three things. Number one, we look at who are the people behind the deal and do they actually have the expertise and the track record to run the project. Number two, what is the submarket and does the submarket meet our criteria for that asset class in particular? And number three, the specifics of the deal. Now, when I reviewed this, I actually found four things that I reviewed in the overall project that had me a bit concerned. Understand that from my perspective, all it takes is one showstopper issue to prevent me from investing. Now, I've not done any due diligence on the sponsor. From what they provided, they seem to have a fairly strong track record, at least according to the disclosures in the executive summary and the offering memorandum. When problems show up in a project, my assertion is that projects run into trouble usually as a result of weakness in management. It could be a gap in the skill set to run the project or perhaps an incompetent individual in a critical role. The executive summary only talks about one team member, and from the information provided, I really have no way to evaluate the quality of the team, and I would suggest that you do more due diligence on the breadth and depth of the team. There's no way to evaluate the depth of the team based on the information they provided. The way it reads, it looks like a one-man show, which is inconsistent with the statements about their track record. I would definitely dig deeper into this part. The second due diligence category is the submarket. In this case, it is a very small market having a population of just about 7,000 people. It's more than an hour and a half from any secondary market. It's really out there on its own. And if a tenant who was to lease this particular industrial building was to leave or go out of business, you could expect vacancy for a long, long time. And for that reason alone, I would pass on this deal. I understand they're a big European customer and they're willing to sign a 10-year lease for the building on completion. But we're going into an economic downturn, and in moments of duress, companies easily cancel leases. Your ability to get any recourse from the tenant who happens to reside in Europe that defaults on a lease is going to be pretty limited. You're then stuck trying to re-rent it to someone else, and it's probably going to result in an extended period of vacancy. If the property was located near a major center, like say San Antonio, I would be much more comfortable, but in the proposed location, I would give it a firm no. The third category is the deal specifics. There were a couple of issues that I saw. The first was one paragraph in the private placement memorandum that had me somewhat concerned. I'll read it to you and then I'll tell you what my objection is, and I'm going to quote. It says, the manager, on its own behalf or on behalf of the company, may from time to time enter into letter agreements or other similar agreements, in brackets side letters, with one or more members. These side letters may entitle a member to make an investment in the company on terms other than those summarized herein or described in the private placement memorandum, or the operating agreement, or provide a member with additional or different rights and benefits. And that's the end of the quote. Now, I personally would not be okay with those terms. From a fairness and consistency standpoint, there should be language in the PPM that says something like, if terms are being offered to one investor, they really need to be offered on a non-discriminatory basis to all investors. You really have to offer a right of first refusal for those similar terms. I would not be okay with the sponsor altering the terms of the deal especially without having to disclose them. That particular paragraph would be a huge red flag to me. Like I said, you only need one thing to kill a project, and killing it more than once doesn't help. But there were some more items that were troublesome for me as well. When I look at the project budget, there is a sources and uses table, which is what you would expect, and the capital stack looks pretty reasonable with 65% debt and 35% equity. But the construction budget on the uses ledger has me somewhat concerned. I don't like that 24% of the project cost was being allocated to soft costs. There was only $335,000 being allocated in financing costs, which for the size of the project frankly seemed quite low to me. Financing costs are also soft costs, so I'm a little confused by the breakup between soft costs, interest reserves, and contingency. The contingency seemed reasonable, the interest reserve seemed low, and the soft costs seemed high. And then finally, with respect to the hard construction costs, they estimated that at just under $70 per square foot. And that's at the extreme low end of the spectrum for industrial construction. When you look at the budget for constructing industrial space all across the nation, in particular for manufacturing and distribution, the average cost of construction is closer to $100 per square foot. The lowest market in the U.S. is Houston, Texas, according to the market studies that I've seen. In Houston, I've seen construction costs somewhere between $70 to $80 per square foot. So having a construction cost that low in a tertiary market seems a little bit suspect. I would definitely want to see a detailed budget for the construction and maybe even have it validated by a cost consultant. So right now there's at least 2 deal killers for me and questions in a couple of other areas. And that's without diving into the numbers or putting the project through any detailed underwriting analysis. Now understand, I'm not here to tell you this is a bad deal. I'm just offering you my perspective, viewing it through the lens of how we would look at it if this crossed our desk. I want to thank you for a fantastic question. And for the listeners at home, have an awesome rest of your day. Go make some great things happen. And we'll talk to you again tomorrow.